In May 2019, the United States tried to kill a company, not with tariffs, not with a lawsuit, but by cutting off its oxygen. Washington put Huawei on the entity list, which meant no American company could sell it so much as a chip, a line of code, or a software license without a special government permission slip that was never coming. Within 2 weeks, Huawei's phone sales fell by up to 40%. Google ripped Android's App Store off future Huawei phones. Qualcomm, Intel, and ARM all quietly walked away. Ren Zhangfei, the ex-army engineer who built Huawei out of a Shenzhen apartment in 1987, told his own staff their revenue projections had just been slashed by $20 billion overnight, and that the bullets fired at the company had, in his words, hit the oil tanks. By most reasonable definitions of corporate warfare, that should have been the end of it. A hardware company that just lost its operating system, its processors, and its 5G supply chain in a single afternoon doesn't usually get to keep existing, let alone come back stronger. And for a couple of years, it looked like the United States had won. Huawei's overseas phone shipments collapsed. The company that once shipped 240 million phones a year told investors in 2023 that it would be lucky to move 30 million, an 88% decline in less than half a decade. Google mobile services vanished from its devices overnight, and with it, half the reason anyone outside China would want to buy one. Analysts wrote the company off as a cautionary tale, the clearest proof yet that no company, however large, can outrun the American technology chokehold once Washington decides to squeeze. Entire business units inside Huawei were quietly wound down. Executives who had spent years building overseas carrier relationships watched contracts evaporate as European telecoms, under their own pressure from Washington, ripped Huawei equipment out of networks they had already built. And then in August 2023, Huawei quietly released a phone. No press conference, no keynote, no fanfare, just the Mate 60 Pro, sitting on shelves in China, technical specifications suspiciously absent. Within days, teardown engineers found something the United States government had spent 4 years and billions of dollars in export controls trying to prevent: a domestically designed, domestically manufactured 7-nanometer chip, built without a single piece of equipment from the Dutch lithography giant ASML. It shouldn't have been possible. American officials had bet an entire sanctions regime on the assumption that China simply could not manufacture chips that advanced without extreme ultraviolet lithography machines that only ASML makes, and that only allies of the United States are allowed to buy. Huawei's own supplier, SMIC, had found a workaround using older deep ultraviolet tools, run through the process so many times over that they could brute force their way to something close to the cutting edge. It was inefficient. It was expensive, with reported yields far below what a modern fab in Taiwan or South Korea would tolerate. It worked anyway. That single phone launch became a geopolitical event. Chinese social media treated it like a national holiday. American senators demanded investigations into how it happened, and Huawei, a company Washington had spent half a decade trying to erase from existence, was suddenly back in the fight it was supposed to have already lost. The comeback didn't stop at one phone. By 2025, Huawei had reclaimed the #1 spot in the Chinese smartphone market for the first time since 2020, edging out Apple with a market share of roughly 16.4%. Its full-year revenue hit 880.9 billion yuan, close to 127 billion US dollars, its second highest total ever, trailing only the peak year of 2020, the year the sanctions first landed. Net profit climbed 8.8% to 68 billion yuan, and the company poured a staggering 192.3 billion yuan, nearly 22% of everything it made, straight back into research and development. Over the last decade alone, That figure adds up to more than 1.38 trillion yuan reinvested into engineering its own way out of a blockade that was designed to be permanent. To put that number in perspective, that's more than the entire annual economic output of countries like the Philippines or Portugal, spent not on growth, but on rebuilding what one export control list took away. More than half of Huawei's entire workforce, 114,000 people, now work in research and development alone, which is a workforce most mid-sized countries would consider a national engineering strategy, not a single company's payroll. None of this happened by accident, and none of it happened for free. Huawei's answer to losing Android was building its own operating system from the ground up. Harmony OS started life in 2019 as something close to an Android clone, a stopgap dressed up as a strategy, still quietly leaning on open source Android code just to keep old apps running. But by October 2024, Huawei shipped Harmony OS Next, which severed the last ties to Android entirely. No more compatibility with the millions of apps built for Google's ecosystem. Every developer building for Huawei's newest phones now has to write native code in Huawei's own language, for Huawei's own kernel, on Huawei's own terms. That is either the boldest bet in consumer technology or the most expensive act of self-sabotage in the industry. And right now, with well over 100,000 apps already rebuilt for the platform, and Huawei publicly chasing third place in global operating systems behind Android and iOS, it's looking a lot more like the former than anyone expected in 2019. The chip side of the story is even stranger. Locked out of ASML's most advanced lithography machines, and with no realistic path to buying them anytime soon, Huawei didn't wait for the technology to become available. It tried to design its way around needing it in the first place. Earlier this year, the company published research on what it calls the Tau scaling law, a chip architecture that stacks logic circuits vertically instead of shrinking them horizontally, squeezing more performance out of the same manufacturing process instead of chasing a smaller one. According to Huawei's own figures, the approach delivers over 50% more transistor density and cuts power consumption by more than 40%, using nothing more advanced than the 7 nanometer process it already has. Over the past 6 years, the company says it has designed and mass-produced more than 380 chips built around this idea. Whether or not the technique holds up at scale, and Huawei itself admits there are real manufacturing hurdles left around heat dissipation and production yield, the fact that a company under a full American technology embargo is now publishing chip architecture research the rest of the industry has to take seriously tells you almost everything about how badly the isolation strategy has backfired. That brings us to the part of the story that should worry the people who wrote the sanctions in the first place. Huawei isn't just making phones again, it's building Ascend, its own line of artificial intelligence chips aimed squarely at replacing NVIDIA inside China. NVIDIA has been barred from selling its most advanced AI hardware into the Chinese market for years now, a restriction that was supposed to starve Chinese AI development of the silicon it needs to compete. Instead, it created a captive market that Huawei is racing to fill. Reports this year suggest that both ByteDance and Alibaba, two of China's largest tech companies, are now placing orders for Huawei's newest AI chips, alongside a rapidly growing domestic cloud computing business built specifically to run them. The company that the United States tried to cut off from the entire global chip supply chain is quietly becoming the backup plan for China's biggest AI ambitions, whether Washington likes it or not. None of this means Huawei has actually won. Its cloud computing revenue slipped in 2025 as Chinese AI infrastructure lagged behind American rivals still running on genuine cutting-edge silicon. Its smartphone lead over Apple in China is razor thin and shrinking again toward the end of the year, with Apple clawing back ground after the iPhone 17 launch. And the technology Huawei is using to get around export controls is, by its own admission, a workaround, not a genuine equivalent to what companies like TSMC can build with the tools Huawei still isn't allowed to touch. Being locked out of the most advanced manufacturing on Earth is not a problem you can out-engineer forever, no matter how much money you throw at the walls closing in around you, and every yuan spent brute-forcing yesterday's process node is a yuan not spent catching up to tomorrow's. But that's exactly what makes this story worth telling. In 1919, the American government made a BET that cutting off one company's access to a handful of critical technologies would be enough to end it. 6 years, close to 200 billion yuan a year in research spending, and one operating system rebuilt from scratch later, Huawei is bringing in more revenue than it did the year the sanctions started, running its own chips, its own cloud, and its own software stack from the ground up, not despite the blockade, in some strange, expensive, inefficient way, partly because of it. Washington tried to prove that a company can't survive without the West's technology. Huawei spent 6 years and everything it had proving the opposite, and whether or not that was the smart bet for either side, it's the one that actually happened. If you enjoyed this one, subscribe to the channel and like the video. There's a lot more coming.